All right. Good afternoon, crafty friends. You've caught me in the midst of, let's see. Nope, I did that in the wrong order. I'm unpacking. Yes, unpacking. Yet again. Crafty friends, you've caught me. Sorry. Turn that off. Ooh. Just about lost it. Figured I'd give people a couple minutes. I know Patty has a live going on over in the Crafty Club for Crafty Club members, those who get their sets a little early. So that is going on. And I always give people a few minutes to kind of wander in. But I figured while I was waiting, I would unpack a few goodies. So, why does that look wrong? Why is that? Oh, probably because here they are. So we have moved again. It's why I was not at the retreat this weekend. That and I was out of town. Haha. Good evening, Kim. I know it feels like a consistent state of packing and unpacking. It doesn't ever really seem to end in my home. We're really, really hopeful that this is it, that this shall be the last one. However, so I'm still in the same community. So I'm in the Palmer Wasilla, which is considered the Mat-Su Valley. So I'm still at the same school subbing, but starting in the fall of next year, I'll be here a month and then gone a month because I'm going to be traveling back and forth with my husband, who's going to be working out at one of the villages, a month on, month off. Hello, Jennifer. So yeah, it's kind of up in the air right now what that will look like next year completely. We aren't totally sure. Like the month that we'll be back here near the school that I sub at currently, John will have off. Like he won't be working that month. So we know we plan to do some other things during that time. So I don't know that I'll be subbing. I can sub out at the village that he works at. So I might be subbing there. It's just my end of the deal is kind of up in the air. So that's okay though. I'm okay with that. It's kind of been my life for the past, I feel like COVID hit everyone, 3-4 years ago. And, about a year before that, my life started fluxing for a whole variety of reasons, different things happening for me personally, for my family, for my husband. And so I feel like I've been in flux since then. Like we've had like 2 or 3 months here and there that have been kind of, I think we figured it out. And then something else gets thrown in the mix. So yeah, it's kind of where we're at. So we're going to do a little Copic coloring. And as usual, we're going to kind of fly by the seat of our pants. The set I'm using today, and obviously this is recorded for anyone who, because we have our small group here today, like right now, but I know that people will tune in later and this will be recorded so you guys can watch it anytime. This is the Namaste set with our fun yoga animals. This is one that I drew. We've got a llama and a sloth or an alpaca, whichever you would prefer. I don't know really what the difference is there, but llama, friend, sloth, koala, and giraffe. So I have stamped out the llama and the sloth. Yes, I am a professional go with the flow person. I think that's my mom teases that I should have moving on my resume at this point because it's that extreme. I'm really, really good at packing and moving. So I've done both of these little guys, and I thought originally what I'd planned on coloring these with no line. So I've done our precious pink. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kim, on the color. I've done the precious pink ink that I've stamped it super lightly with. And then I'm going to use just earth tones. And the llama is really, really simple to do as no line coloring. And the sloth can be as simple as you want it to, okay? I'm going to show you kind of a really basic way to color him with no line coloring. And then I'm going to do just some really light details on top of that. You could choose to add or not add. I think the giraffe in the stamp set would be really fun with rainbow colors. He's got all those fun spots. So Mr. Llama, we can choose to do him as solid, or we could choose to do him as kind of splotched, which I always think that's kind of fun to do, where they're kind of splotchy. So let's do that. I'm going to keep it pretty simple with my color choices. Let's keep the majority of the fur kind of a lighter color. And I've got extra like cardstock that I would eventually cut off no matter what. So I'll do some testing off to the side. Let's do this. I'm thinking, what if we use some E4s? Because it's kind of a light creamish tan, but the E4s have kind of a gray undertone to them. So as you get darker, it definitely has a gray feel to it. All right, but at the most, let's see, that's E4-1 and E4-2. I'm trying to remember, I think E4-4 is my big jump. I'm trying to remember. I think E4-3 is one more. Yeah, okay. I'm going to pull out 3 E4s. I've got an E4-1, E4-2, and E4-3. I may or may not use the E4-3. Oh, shoot, Jennifer, I'm sorry. Okay, I'll do this. I'm going to try to keep this as simple as possible. How about that? We're going to keep this little llama guy as simple as possible. And then I'm going to pick 2 colors to give him some splotches. I'm trying to pick colors that I think you guys might have, like that a lot of people, and obviously the E4s may not be a group. That one is looking odd, like it needs to be re-inked. Ooh, that one died. A painful death. Don't do that. That one needs a physician. That's really dark. What if I went the other way? Other direction. Wonder if I have that one in my other bag. So see, things are, pull this down so you guys can see what I'm doing. I enlarged so it would be closer for you. And then I'm up here chatting to myself. I still think we're going to want the darker. So, okay, we're going to use, For our darker splotches, we're going to use E18 and E15. But the majority of our llama, so your markers are in the same state. Oh, because they're dying. Kim, I think what's happened with mine is they've been abused, and that's the easiest way to say it. I have not been very consistent about cleaning them. I have not been very good about making sure as I move them back and forth that they get the caps on nice and tight. And so I do have a couple that I've now ruined, and I'll show you what this one looks like right now. So this is my E17, and this lid, even when it's on, feels a little bit loose. See, that end is tight, but this end, like, you can tell it's not always all the way tight. This tip is literally rock solid. And at this point, that means that marker probably can't be saved. Like, you could go in, like it's crumbling on top of my card. You could go in and replace both the nibs. The problem is when you re-ink that core is solid too. So you can put fluid in there, but it isn't always going to you can get some sticky gunk in there that doesn't completely re-liquefy, if that makes sense. So when they've gone that far gone, they've kind of crystallized and literally solidified. It's not a matter of running out of ink. They ran out of alcohol and the ink's still sitting there. I might have to toss this guy and start over. Now, that being said, I've had some of my markers for, I think it'd be 18 years now. So I'm not worried about the fact that maybe I've destroyed one or two along the way, considering how many I have. So it does happen. Yeah. And unfortunately that is the case, Kim. You can always try to replace nibs and add a little bit of ink just to see. Do not just add colorless blender. At that point, you're changing the color and you don't have that consistent color. You can try to if it's truly out of ink and you've let it go dry, and so the ends are still kind of soft and supple, those you definitely can refill without as much issue. But when they've done what mine have done, where it's solid like that, you may have to, you can give it a try. I always tell people to try, but you might have to do a little more work. All right. So what I am going to do is I'm going to look at the curly part of this little guy's fur, and I'm going to do his neck, and I'm going to do the front leg, the one that's toward me, his body, and all the way down this back hind leg that's again towards me. And because he's a pretty open shape, I can go ahead, and this E41, my lightest E4, it's not going to cover the lines. I'm going to still be able to see the lines. So I'm going to go ahead and color in all of his curly stuff down his whole body. And the fun part about doing a curly, kind of furry, fuzzy critter is the coloring doesn't have to be real solid. So if it's kind of mottled looking, it's not real solid. That part's not going to matter at all. Now, if I'm not going to fussy cut him, I do have to slow down a little bit at the edges. Okay, so see, I've got all of that piece filled in. Then I'm going to grab my next one, which is my E42, right? And it's just one shade darker. We're going real subtle on this little guy. And I'm going to do what I am calling squiggles. And it's really more like a scribble, if that makes sense. So what it looks like, big. So it's not little loops and it's not like scallops. It's that combined. It's kind of all over the place. You have to make your hand go up and down in both directions, in and out. And it's truly like a scribble. It's a very technical knot technique. And I am going to literally go through my entire little llama everything I colored and do these little guys, these little squiggles. And that is going to give him that curly fur. Now we haven't defined any of those little creases yet or edges yet. We're just giving him texture. And I go all the way through kind of one pass. Have to slow down at the edges again. But I want it to bump up to the edges. If I don't bump to the edge, you're going to end up with this funny little halo that he's light around his edges. So you do want to do that. Graffiti, that's exactly, it does, Jennifer. It looks a lot like graffiti. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this sit for a few seconds while I'm chatting to you, letting it dry a little bit. I'm going to use that same marker. So I still have my E42 in my hand. I'm going to come back in and I'm going to hit some of these areas that I know are going to be darker. And I'm going to do those same little scribbles, little squiggles a second time. So on his underbelly, he gets a little group. And look what happens. Even just with that second layer, it gets a touch darker. I'm going to do the same thing where his arm meets his neck and the underside of his neck. Okay. I'm going to do a little bit. Now see the way he's positioned, everything on the inside of his body. So like what's that? My right hand side of the front leg and the left hand. So the inside, those will be a little bit darker. So I'm going to run right along this edge, a little bit darker on this guy, a little bit darker. Because think about it, the sunshine or the light is hitting him on his tail, right? Coming from up. So he's going to catch a little light out here. He'll catch a little light from this side. So the underside of his arms and legs, or in this case, all of his legs, is going to be darker. And all I have to do is I'm layering this. Here's a kind of a third pass at some of those areas. But for me, I kind of want to see where like the body starts and stops. And I can sort of see that on here now, but I'd like to see it a little bit more. So this is where sometimes I will bring in a third color. And in this case, it's that E43. And I'm going to use it really sparingly. Now I could do this in those little squiggles again, or I could even add a few little dots. And I can decide how much I want to do of this. So I'm going to do it in two spaces. I'm going to do it on his underbelly and at that crease where it meets the front and the hind legs. So right along here, and then also where his neck is coming out from behind that leg as well. All right, so now we can see all those different pieces. We've pretty much lost, for the most part, our pink lines. So what we're seeing is that curly fur versus the pink outlines. All right, so now we've got the front pieces. Now we want to go ahead and fill in those back pieces. Those are going to be darker by nature because what we're seeing is the underside, the part that's already in the shadows. So I am actually going to start on the curly part still, front and back leg, with the E42. And I'm going to go ahead and fill in the curly portion. Front and back. And those are tiny, right? And I'm going to immediately go to my E43. I might need to sit just a second. Cheating, blowing. Copic dries quick, But if I immediately try to put that texture on top of that wet ink, it'll kind of disperse a little bit. And I do want to see a little bit of that texture. So sometimes I will give it a chance to dry a little. And really, remember, this is our first layer of texture. So I'm going to go ahead with my E43 and fill in all those little areas. And this one, these little legs, I might go over kind of sitting between layers. And it's harder because it's so small, it goes quick. And so then I have to sit and wait. And I'm not always good at that. But I need to let it sit and dry and then come back and give it that next layer of ink that's going to push it back. That's what's going to put that leg behind the other, away from the viewer, is that depth. And so we want to add that so that we can see that those legs are pushed back. Now, the other thing we could do, and we're not going to do today, but you could do to push that back, is to add a cooler color. So we could come in with like a blue violet or a violet and push that back using a blue violet. And that would work really, really well too. Okay, so we've got all of our curly guys going. Let's add, and I decided we're going to keep it super simple. So we're going to do him more the solid color. And I know I said we were going to add texture or add spots, but I think we'll keep them. I said we'll do really simple. So I'm going to go back to E41 and I am going to hit his little feet. Now, typically when I look at pictures of little llamas and alpacas, their little, like their feet tend to have, as they get down their legs to the bottom, the fur tends to be really short and smooth because it is so short. Yay, he should look fluffy. I'm glad. And he might have a little bit of curls on his face, so we can add that. But his nose will be really, really smooth, right? Because that'll be like super short fur. Turning him. And his little ears. So I've got all these little pieces, and I know what I forgot to do, but that's okay because it's super light. So, all right, E4, 2. I'm going to go, remember how we did dark, like on the right-hand side and then dark on the left-hand side. Same on those little feet because we're going down the full length. So E4, 2. Double checking so I say it right. Kind of flicking in. And then it's going to come from the other side on these little back ones. And I'm not going to worry too much about the toes. Keep it simple. And this back little leg is going to get dark. And these we can actually keep smooth. So I'm going to come back with the E41, and all I'm going to need to do is really just brush over that color. These are going to be good blenders and that they blend fairly easily. All right, on his little face, I am going to grab one other marker just for sillies, an E93. We're going to add a little touch right on his little nose, right into the center of those little ears. And then that E41 is going to fill in the rest of the ear and hit the E93. So it'll really push that. It's going to be super, super soft, just really subtle. Now, depending on if you want to keep the face smooth, I'm going to keep his little mouth kind of muzzle smooth. And he's so smushed. He's so funny. So I'm going to go kind of around both of his little cheeks, kind of the bottom edge. And then his little face, I'm going to do a few little squiggles. Now, I know I just lost his eye. I'm going to put that back here in just a second. That was what I forgot to do. E4-1, smoothing out his little face, his little muzzle, just the little cheeks up around his mouth. I don't even know what you call those. Those are his muzzle, up around his nose. So what I would typically do is use a Copic multi-liner before I started coloring. Haha. And I would either use a sepia one, which is that brown tone, or I would use a black one. And it's kind of up to you how much detail, but I would definitely do his little eye, which is closed. Now, because I'm doing this though after I colored my Copic, you could use any sketch marker. It does not need to be Copic. Now you could argue and come in and do some of his little smile. I would argue you don't need to, that hopefully some of the shading helps with that. I'm going to do one thing. I'm going to take my E4-3 and I'm going to come right down that little center. And I'm going to define that even more so we can really see. Give it that curve. And then I'm also going to come in with a few little squiggles right at the edge of his face. And instead of trying to go through my E4-2 and my E4-3, I'm just going to hit this, or E4-1 and E4-2, I'm just going to hit it with my E4-1 to soften that edge. There we go. And it bleeds that out a little bit, just enough so it softens it. There we go. So his face still has that curly feel to it, but his muzzle has that little bit smoother feel to it. I'll let that sit for a second so you guys can see it. I know my hands get in the way and then things get blurry. It's hard when you're coloring to keep your hand out of the way and keep everything kind of on screen. So I'll let that sit for a second. So that is my little llama. Now you could add a full scene behind him, and that would help make some of those extra pink lines disappear. I really had no intent to do that today. I was truly going to say, no, let's really keep it simple. So instead, I am going to just add a little cast shadow underneath him. So that sets him on the ground. So if I wanted to leave the sentiment and then just trim around him, it doesn't look like he's floating midair. So what I would do is I'm going to add kind of a shape, a shadow, a cast shadow shape directly underneath them. And I'm going to start with a C3. And any of your grays will work. You could use a blue violet for this, but it's going to be fairly tight to my llama to start. And what I mean by that is I'm not going to go very far out. It's directly under his little body, kind of where he's touching. Not a whole lot further. And I'm going to leave the edges of that shadow softer. So see how the core, that center piece, is a little bit darker? It's exactly how I want it. And then I'm going to use a C1. And here's the deal. I don't need to come out very far from him. He's touching the floor. And the light, we've kind of hinted that the light is really truly right above him. So it's not like, now if we put it right on his rear end, right, from behind, his shadow would push out to the left. Or if we put it kind of coming in from that left-hand side, it would push out behind him. But we've kind of put the shadow right on top. So we can make it really fancy and complex, but we don't need to. So we're going to give him a little pool of a cast shadow. We're going to extend it just barely with that C1. Now, if you want, you can fade that even further by going in with your colorless blender and fading that further. But this gives me just a sense that he's kind of connected to the floor. I've grounded him down, and that he's not floating midair. And I could leave him just like that. Now, I don't have the shadow coming up and connecting to the second ear, but that ear is off the ground, remember? It's not touching down. His little face is smushed against the floor. This ear is flattened because it's against the floor. This one is actually off the floor. So it gets a little more confusing if I connect that shadow all the way up above his head, because then it looks like, have we twisted him somehow and laid his head on the ground? So that's my thinking or my purpose for not extending that shadow that much further. You are welcome. Good. I'm glad that helps make sense, Jennifer. If you guys ever have questions, that's something going to art school I do have a little bit more background to. It's one of those things you don't necessarily intuitively know. And if you don't have the background in art, it's good information. So, and I don't always remember to explain that stuff. Okay, so there's our llama. Fun, pretty straightforward. We're gonna start the little sloth kind of in a similar manner and keep him pretty straightforward. And then we'll add detail as much or as little as you want. So I am going to tuck these guys away. I'm trying to think. I'll leave... I don't know that I need that. No, I do not. I am going to grab my Copic multi-liner so I don't lose his little features. And I'm going to do his eyes, which are two little U shapes. They make that sound. And his little mouth. And this is a super fine multi-liner. This one is actually a 0.03, so it's teeny, teeny, tiny. For something on a stamp this size, I would try to get like a 0.1 or smaller. A 0.3 starts getting chunky enough that suddenly you're wider than the stamp lines. Do weigh your markers when you refill, and do take the nibs out to clean. Okay, so I don't take my nibs out when I refill, but I do weigh them. So when I refill my markers, I will weigh them, and then I will put some ink in and I will weigh them again. And I've got numbers of what I'm aiming for, depending on if it's a sketch or a chow or a original. So I absolutely use a scale. It's almost impossible to truly fill them and get them. And I don't try to fill them all the way full, because then I have markers that blob on me. And do take them nibs out to clean? I don't. I'm very cautious when I clean. Most of my markers are dirty, so I can show you. So I will use rubbing alcohol, and a lot of times I'll use them on the little wipes. I think I've got some. Yes, I do. Maybe. So I use these little guys. You can buy them in huge amounts, and someone showed me this little trick a long time ago. These guys work great for cleaning purposes. So I just am really careful, and I stay away from the nib. So I would clean this portion and literally right up to that felt without getting it. Ta-da! Look how much nicer that looks. And then I literally will take this guy and stick it. And this is where cleaning markers gets really, really messy. So you can see, like, there's still way more ink in there. So I'll literally stick this here. and take a Q-tip. You can hear it. Isn't that a satisfying sound? Okay, so that now I've got some alcohol like kind of in there because it squeezes out of that little wipe. So I'll take the dry end. Ta-da! Look at that. So that's nice and clean. And because I've done the dry end of the Q-tip, goes right back on, clean. This end doesn't get open and closed near as often, so oftentimes it is clean. But look, now I have one clean marker out of 358. Yeah, so that, Jennifer, I've always done it that way. I do not take nibs out. I'm just careful with it. You don't want to get the rubbing alcohol. It's cheaper to use rubbing alcohol. I would not recommend cleaning with the colorless blender. But, and if I'm in a huge hurry, I will do small amounts of ink to do refilling without weighing. I have just discovered it usually saves me more time just to weigh. And so my little scales, I don't know what you have. These are the ones I have, these little Jewelers, tiny scales. They literally sit, I have one compartment on my kind of on desk tool thing that has the Q-tips, the wipes, and the scale in it. And that all sits. And so when I have a jar, and what I tend to do, or what I've tried to be better about, is as I find one that needs refilling, I stick it in this other cup on my desk. So when I get a little group of 4 or 5 of them, I'll take the time. And I usually will not allow myself to just refill and put away. If it's getting refilled, it also gets cleaned. That's kind of the rule. But, you know, yeah, I try. Okay. So, and that was the perfect amount of time. We've let the black ink of the little face that I added get dry, which we definitely want to do. And then my favorite colors for the sloths are the E7s. The E7s have kind of a mauve undertone to them. I'm missing one. Where is my 7, 4? I know it's here. This is where like you can go cross-eyed because you're like, I know it's in here. Okay. So I think I can probably do, you remember how we did the llama and we did the front of his body first and then did those back legs? It's just so we don't lose that line in between, right? We don't, because as we start making those lines disappear, say, oh my gosh, no problem, Jennifer. I think that's part of doing these classes. I think it's about sharing information and technique as much as anything. So, hi, Tamara. So you guys are always welcome to distract because I'll just get back. We'll roll back around eventually, right? So I'm going to do, I think, let's do his bottom half because that's kind of a big area. And then we'll do his top kind of around his face. We'll do it kind of in half and half. His little paws, which aren't really paws. What we're seeing is his claws because a sloth has those really long claws. So we've got a little set of claws and his claws down here. That'll be a different color. And then on his face will be a different color. So with the E7s, and I'm going to use E70, E71, and E74. Thanks, Tamara. I said easy. You can ask Jennifer off to the side quietly. It's because they were doubting that it would be that easy. So hopefully they feel that way. All right. So E70, I'm going to do the fur. And this, we're going to start pretty smooth. So E70. And we're going to fill in. Now this, we are going to lose our lines faster than we did with our llama. That's part of the reason it's a little bit more tricky. is we are going to lose the pink lines a little bit quicker than we did on our last one. And I'm going to keep spinning him around so I can see my edges, because I'm going to try to not fussy cut him out again. I'll do something real similar. We'll put a shadow underneath him. And I know this is going to be that same color, so I'm not worried that I bumped up in there, but I'm going to try to avoid his little claws because I'd like those to stay a different color. And then, okay. So at this point, I am not going to be trying to figure out where does this fur go. I'm just figuring out shape. So we've got, Jennifer says, yes, practice. Good. All right. So I'm going to take my E7-1 and I'm trying to think of shape, how to create shape on this guy. We've got cylinders for legs, right? Kind of long, tubey guys. So on this one, it's pretty easy because if our light's coming from the top, it's the edge away from the light. So this bottom edge, because he's turned it sideways, kind of lifted it up in that tree pose, we know that this bottom edge, as it curves away from the light, is going to get darker and create that kind of cylinder shape. Now, the E7s, like the E4s, are easy to blend. The E7s are butter. They are wonderful. So the other little piece of leg that we see is kind of the upper leg. And I will admit, openly admit, I'm the one who drew these. I'm not sure about all the joints on the animals. I might have given them some joints that they don't have, or bending them the way that they don't bend. So I apologize for that. Seek him, I can draw animals with silliness, not realistic in mind. Okay. And then on this leg, again, it's a long cylinder, but our light source is coming from up above. So you can argue this two different ways. You can argue it like what we did the llama, and that the outer edges might catch some light and the inner edges would be dark. The other way you can argue it is because it's a cylinder and wrapping away from the viewer, you could have dark on both sides with that kind of lighter band running down the center. I am going to focus on one side and keep it a little bit easier. I'm going to focus on that bottom edge of his foot, and then coming up along the inside edge of this leg. And again, this is where I have to slow down because it is a little bit harder to see already. This is the part I almost lost. And when you do no line coloring, remember, you can do super small sections. You don't have to do bigger sections. You could do literally one leg, and do that. I try to pick segments so that I'm not trying to blend certain things. Like if I did this leg and then this leg, sorry, my ink, I'm going to have this seam kind of running up his center that's harder to blend. And so if I can do that whole lower body and stop where those arms are, it's easier to keep those looking a little smoother. Okay, so one more little area. I don't want to lose where the foot comes in and touches the leg. So I'm going to grab my E7-4, and just like the llama, we're going to do this very limited. We're going to do it right underneath, right along that very back edge. Right where it comes out from behind, and maybe along that inner leg. But I think because this leg is forward, I'm going to leave the darkest color off of that. So I want to smooth these out. So I'm going to backtrack. And you could do dark to light. A lot of times when you see me do no line coloring, I will go dark to light. So then I don't lose those seams. Today I'm doing light to dark. I'm a firm believer that there's not necessarily a right or wrong way to do this. It's going to be what works for you, and I'd rather give you guys the tools to experiment with it and figure out what is easy for you. In a class full of students, someone will say one way is easier and the other person sitting next to them will say, nope, that doesn't make any sense to me. This is easier. So I give you guys the tools and you get to decide. All right. So, but that gets me pretty smooth. I'm going to do the same thing on his upper body. So again, starting with, and I'm going to flip him. E70. Trying to avoid his little claws. And I do need to do one more dark spot on that lower body that I just realized. And it's where it comes up. You can see it right now. It comes up in between those two arms. It should be darker because it's definitely going to be in shadow down under there. And we're going to lose that here pretty quickly. So as soon as I get this filled in, and this is the tricky part on this guy because the little face gets into some small details. So, okay. So E71, we are going to first, right off the bat, come in and add just a touch right underneath where those hands come together. And I'm going to go ahead and blend that right in. There we go. It takes so little to pop that forward. Just that little touch and it pops those arms forward, which is always nice. So now we've got, again, we've got cylinders. I'm sorry, my finger's now distracting me with the yellow on it. We've got the cylinders that he's bent around. And so it's just like this little front leg. The dark is going to come to that bottom edge and up, which means we might have to go darker on the lower body, and that's okay. And then where it's coming out from behind, kind of his chest, we're going to have a little bit, because that's going to push, again, that area back. So we can kind of think about pushing and pulling a little bit because we want to push his chest back behind those arms. And even though I'm coloring this guy pretty much kind of smooth transitions from light to dark, if I've got a little texture on there, I'm okay with that because he's furry. And then I'm going to think about going back and adding even more. And then that part will be up to you. If you guys want to, you can. If not, you can leave him just how we get him. All right, so now I need to think about, is that dark enough now, or have I lost where the arms are sitting on top of his tummy? And I'm thinking just right up in here. And see, this is the E7 one a second time. I'm not even going to the darker one, that E7 4. I thought, I think if I put that second layer on, it'll be just enough. There we go. Okay. Then he's got these little claws. We're going to use some E5s. If I can find them. Oh, I bet I know where that is. Where? Oh, where? There it is. I've got an E50, and I'm going to do both upper and lower little sets of claws. And then I'm also going to do the majority of his little face. Now, the Copic multi-liner should have been sitting there for long enough. We shouldn't have an issue there. Should be in the optimum word. I'm going to use a little E53. And come right up along the base of the hands and right up the center. Again, these are actually claws. I keep calling them hands, but you know. And then right along kind of these edges of the claws. So here's the cheater on this, right? Because I've used that light pink ink, the precious pink, it's not totally covering the pink. It's almost just enhancing it. So when I come back with the E50, you can still see the pink lines there, but because I've added that little bit darker, it looks like I've colored that. So yes, I'm kind of fudging it. Thanks, Kim. She put up a little sale for you. For us. Thank you, Kim. I'm going to add that E53 to the little nose because I like, it's just a real soft kind of earthy tone. And then the face. So I'm actually going to grab the E70 and I'm going to do a tiny bit right in from the side, kind of under his little eye on both sides. And right above his little eye, kind of flicking in just barely. And I'm going to lighten it right away with my E50. He's tiny, so I'm not going to get a whole lot of detail here. It's not going to get a lot of little tiny details. But if you've ever noticed, it's kind of like a raccoon almost, in that around his little eyes get really, really dark. But if I go all the way to how dark they are, you're going to lose the little eye slits altogether. So I'm going to ease into it. I'm going to start with the E71 and fill that in. And because I'm doing it solid versus doing little flicks, it's actually going to appear like it's almost darker than anything I've done on his body so far. And I'm going to give you the option, if you want to, you could use a little bit of E74. And if you do, it's going to come from the edge and maybe along that little bottom corner. But it might not cover the whole thing even. Now you could go darker, but I'm really happy with just that. So This is another one. You could stop here, right? If you wanted, so maybe pause what you're doing. If you wanted, you could add the hint of some fur. And sloths are kind of unique in that their fur is actually really long. It's not short. He's not fluffy. He's got this long fur. And so if you want to go crazy with a sloth, there's a lot you can do with them. So if you wanted to, I would recommend doing it in a couple spots, not all over, because it's going to go crazy, but maybe watch before you do it. You might want to leave him right here. I would take the E7-1. They've got this really long fur on their arms. So I would use the very tip. And you have to have that pressure control. You might even practice off to the side because I want little tiny, tiny flicks, right? Skinny lines. And I'm going to literally go because it kind of wraps around his arm and hangs off his arm. And I'm going to do that on both of his little arms. I'm going to turn it so my hand can curve in the way I want it to. Because if I don't, my hand's going to try to curve. It won't curve off in that direction. I'm going to do something similar on this leg that's bent up. Kind of long and hanging. And then it's kind of up to you. I might add a few kind of up around his little head. And a couple down the long leg. That's probably it. Like I would stop getting crazy. So I would keep it, if you wanted to add a little bit of fur, I would keep it super, super simple and do really limited amounts. And it's because he's tiny. I can't add a ton of detail because of how small he is. But if you wanted to, that's an easy way to do it. I shouldn't say easy. That's a way to do it. It takes a little practice. Think about a couple things. Think about keeping that line really fine, doing key limited flicks, and then also think about the direction before you lay it down. Think about where is that fur going? Which direction do you want it? Do you want curve it around those rounder shapes? The arms are round, they're cylinders, so we want to curve it around, and it's hanging long over his arms around it. It doesn't go down the length like most fur does. It literally kind of hangs off of his arms. So this is a way you could do that. Now, if you get to this phase and you've done those light little flicks, remember, I only did it with my E7-1. So if they're driving me nuts, and as my grandmother and mom used to say, it makes your teeth itch. And I know I still use that phrase, but people laugh all the time. If it makes your teeth itch, meaning you look at it and you're like, oh, dang it, I just hate it. Grab your E70, and you're not going to scrub it. You're going to do a wash. You're going to do over it really, really lightly. So you would brush over it really, really lightly one time. Let it move around a little bit. It'll actually soften all of those lines. And then you can do it like one more time without disrupting other things. It'll just soften the lines. Okay. So that is an option. If you tried the fur, you don't like it, you can go back in and do just a little bit. So the only thing we're going to have left to do on him is to add a little shadow underneath him as well. Me too, Jennifer. I try to use them whenever possible. And I think the teeth itching one is one I've had in my back pocket forever. I use it all the time when I teach. So C3, again, we want to put this right underneath him. Now, remember, it's not going to come up to this knee up in the air. This is where he's connected to the ground, but it will go that wide because his leg and elbow, legs, whatever, are casting that shadow underneath. But the core is going to be right. So this is the C3. The core is going to be right underneath him. And look, we've got this other little piece that comes out this way too. So, but the C3 is going to be pretty tight. It's not going to go very far. Creating that little pool underneath him. And then a C1. And this is the one where we can take it a little bit further. And we can even use some little guidelines if we want. I'll show you. All right, so, and I'll need to do a little bit wider, but here, this will be easier to see. So if my light is coming some light source above, I can use like a piece of paper or a pencil. If it's coming from a truly like single light source, like light bulb right above his head, you could angle from that light bulb like out through the widest part of his body. And that's how wide, can you see down the bottom? That's how wide his little shadow should be. And it would do the same over here. So if I went from that light bulb down to his little elbow, how wide that would be. Now, if it's more of there's lighting all across the yoga studio from above and it's coming more straight down, it's more just kind of straight down because he's got multiple lights across the top of the studio. So, again, you can kind of play with that and your reality versus anyone else's. And you can argue anything. I mean, I can tell you all sorts of stuff. We can make that up. But in general, the shadow should be as wide as he is and underneath where it touches. So he's touching that foot down, but then we would have it as wide as these other pieces. And you can play around with how you design that. Again, if it's coming from an angle, you can throw it off and add some of that shape with elbows and limbs kind of sticking out as you go out, coming out wide and coming back in. So you can make it fairly complicated, but oh yes, all of my animals are in a yoga studio, Kim, for sure. So, but anyway, I thought this set is one that I appreciate. No line coloring is intimidating for a lot of colorers, but I thought this would be another good one to kind of play with, and keeping this color choices really simple. Just because you normally would do a llama with 6 different colors, take it off the table, give yourself 2 or 3, and then keep it really simple. Narrow it down, do something fun with the texture. Same with the sloth. The texture on him gets way more complicated. Take that out of the picture, take it off the table. 2 to 3 colors, keep them smooth. And then if you want to go back and add a little bit of texture, add a little bit of texture, but keep it simple. Take the things that are making it a more complicated image off the table when you're trying to do something as complicated as no line. So make it work for you, I guess, is my best suggestion on some of that. I am glad the cast shadow stuff was helpful. Patty's going to join us at the Sloth Yoga Studio. Excellent. And I think the llama would be spectacular as well. The koala bear is pretty cute, although I hear they're not as nice. Thank you, all of you, and always for being patient with me when I come in and kind of do things kind of at the last second. I hope you guys are still learning stuff and getting valuable information. So thank you, Carla. Very sweet. And always, if you have questions for me, if you will put my name in there so that it kind of pings me in Facebook, stuff about refilling, cleaning, all of that good stuff with Copic. So, I am always happy to answer. And if I don't catch it, someone can tap me as well. All right. So here you go, ladies. I think we just about, we did our little bit of time for a fun coloring for your Monday evening pleasure. I'll have to clean your markers. Oh, Jennifer, I do not have time. I have more boxes. I literally have stacks of boxes that go in my craft room, and they're just sitting there quietly. So I don't think it's going to happen today or anytime soon, but good luck. Godspeed. You guys have a great night. I will see you all later. Thank you, Kim. Thanks a lot. Bye, you guys.